Okay, and here we continue with the next city and the next kind of strategies on how to deal with rapid urbanization. This is New York. It's similar to the situation in London. There's also been a famous book that has been documenting how people lived in substandard housing, basically squats and slums in New York at the end of the 19th century. So because so many people were flocking into New York from Europe mainly, the city was becoming overly urbanized, overcrowded. And by the late 19th century, 3/5 of the overall population were living in these kind of overcrowded tenement housing. And everything would be built packed as much as possible. So if you would have a figure ground map of New York at the time, then you would see that about 80% of the ground is covered with houses, which means there's only 20% left for public spaces. Mainly that means these are roads, not much more than that. Hardly any parks, if any at all, because there was simply no space for that. There were additional problems in New York that other cities didn't have to cope with, and that was that people that came to New York were extremely poor. Often they were from Europe, fleeing from oppression, and could only take the bare minimum, and often they were already poor in their home countries, and then they arrived in New York and still, didn't have a job and needed to find a new start. So poverty was a big problem, and then people came from all different countries speaking different languages, so it was quite difficult to integrate people into the new city, which also means that you would have the problem of slums and kind of ghettos emerging. Some of them we're almost a little bit happy about from today's perspective. You have in New York something like Little Italy. Later you get Chinese people coming in, then you get Chinatown. But at the moment, people were flocking in during rapid urbanization was a problem because it's really difficult to integrate people if they're from a different cultural background, different language. There were different ideas on how to tackle overcrowding in New York. One of them was an architecture competition for tenement housing, and the winner of this competition came out as this dumbbell tenement. So here you see kind of before and after image of an urban block. So before, kind of relatively diverse, very densely packed, but with different types of houses, maybe from different built at different times, different sizes. Now they're very densely packed with this one typology. So again, the idea is to use repetitive, like cheap typology to house as many people as possible. Here, if you look at the floor plan, it's again very similar, right? It's central staircase, small units connected to a central corridor, and then washing, toilet facilities, centralized and close to the staircase. They tried to be so efficient that they made very little courtyard here, mainly just to get a little bit of air and light in there, but this is not really a space to stay. Similar to Germany, this size was decided by the water hose of the fire brigade, and then this shape came about in order to get a little bit of extra light into the back area here. So yeah, that's where you get the dumbbell shape from. Kind of interesting anecdote is that people didn't know how to live in this kind of typology. So a lot of the migrants were coming from the poor countryside in Europe. Now they were in New York, in a very dense city, probably never lived higher than the second floor, and now they would live in here, and simply not educated. One of the problems with these buildings in the courtyard was that over time they would deteriorate, particularly because people would throw their trash in there, and then they would fill up, it would stink, it would be unhealthy, unhygienic. And through these kind of lack of education, lack of discipline maybe, this area starts to become bad name, and something that's well intended in the end doesn't work. People that can afford would move out, and only the poor would maintain. Another example is something that has been copied from England and brought over to the US, which is philanthropic housing. So this is called the Hull House, initiated by Jane Addams. So yeah, she was the spouse of a wealthy industrialist, and a person that wanted to give back something to the community. So in the same line of thought as the Peabody or other philanthropic developments, Miss Addams would create this housing estate for the poorer people. And here you also have mixed use, so it's housing together with local shops, maybe a restaurant, laundry facilities, and so on. And what is interesting about this one, why I added it, is not because there hasn't been built a lot of times, this kind of typology. So in terms of quantity, it didn't really help to do away with overcrowding, but it had a very noble ambition, and that was that it would educate people that live here. Often the poor were not educated, not having many skills, not being able to participate in the economy. But her idea was to give people, mainly the women that would stay at home, an education. So either sewing or other occupations, and with that they could start a business or start to become economically active, and therefore it's some way of emancipating the women, even of the poorer families. Okay, this was the last one. Yeah, thank you for listening. In the next kind of couple of lectures we'll look at other attempts, and every session we'll talk about different topics, but all of them in a way are related to this process of rapid urbanization, overcrowding, and how cities deal with that problem.